Welcome back to the program. We're discussing the proposed Keystone XL pipeline and the controversy it's generated here in the United States. Joining us, we have two people who are on opposite sides of that debate. Diana Furchtgott-Roth is in favor of the project. She's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research and the former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. And Tyson Slocum, an environmentalist who is opposed to the pipeline. He's director of the Public Citizens Energy Program. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Diana, in the past few days, those who support the construction of the pipeline have received something of a setback. The Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States, that's a government agency, released a letter saying that the tar sands extraction method is very expensive. With the dropping oil price, it gets even more expensive. It creates a bigger carbon footprint. What do you make of that letter?
It's not really up to the Environmental Protection Agency to tell companies what's profitable and what isn't. It's up to the Environmental Protection Agency to set standards for clean air and clean water. So I don't think that that letter is appropriate.
But they are fulfilling their mandate to make sure that there is clean air.
Well, the State Department also released a report saying that there would be fewer deaths and fatalities if the oil were transported from Canada through a pipeline instead of by train. And so there are these different factors that we need to weigh. And I think human safety is very important.
Tyson, what did you make of that letter?
I think it's very important. The primary regulatory approach here by both the State Department and the Environmental Protection Agency is to conduct an environmental impact statement on whether or not this proposed pipeline is going to harm the environment. That is a standard for any large infrastructure project. And so the fact that we've got findings from the Environmental Protection Agency that constructing this pipeline is going to increase the greenhouse gas emission footprint, that is a problem. And it's really unfortunate that the Keystone pipeline has become kind of the centerpiece of energy policy, because this pipeline has really nothing to do with U.S. energy policy. It has nothing to do with lowering energy prices or making us energy independent. It's all about prioritizing landlocked Canadian crude oil and getting it into international markets. And it's unfortunate that this has become a proxy for a national energy policy debate. There are a lot of other energy infrastructure projects. There's a lot of other issues that we ought to be focusing on, and not the Keystone pipeline.
Diana, you want to respond to that? Yeah.
I really agree with that. I mean, the Keystone XL pipeline is just one pipeline. We actually have many other pipelines that come from Canada and cross borders. We have many million miles of pipeline in the United States. We actually need more pipeline because we're producing more oil in the middle of the country that needs to get out to the coast. It needs to get down to the Gulf Coast to be refined. So really, it's a tempest in a teapot. It's just symbolic for the environmentalists. But this oil from Canada is not going to remain landlocked. It's going to be used. Canada is building a pipeline to the West Coast, and its oil can be transported to Asia. It's also building a refinery. The refineries in Asia are far less efficient than our refineries on the Gulf Coast. So from the point of view of carbon footprint, it makes a lot more sense for the oil to travel by pipeline down and get refined here in the United States than get refined in Asia. The oil is going to be used. Why shouldn't our companies and our workers have the jobs for doing that? When our technology is more efficient and has less of a carbon footprint, if we are concerned about carbon footprints, than technology in Asia.
At the beginning of the program, we had that report in which people who live in the state of Nebraska, for instance, expressed their worry and concern over the fact that if there is an accident, their state, that part of the country, is going to be heavily polluted by leaking oil. Don't they have a point?
Well, they certainly do have a point, and also the citizens of South Dakota.
Right.
And that hasn't been in the news very much, but citizens of South Dakota also want a renewed discovery process, because TransCanada, the company that's building Keystone XL, has to get its pipeline reapproved to go through South Dakota. That hasn't been in the news at all. But we need to weigh the different kinds of options. It's safer to transport oil by pipeline than by train. There are also people who are objecting to have trains filled with crude oil running through their communities. And there was a horrific accident in Lac Mégantic, Quebec, just a couple of years ago, where 47 people got killed because a train rolled backwards because its brakes were not installed properly, were not put in place properly. and it rolled into the town, set on fire, and killed 47 people. We are going to be using oil in the United States. Oil is God's gift to man. It means that electricity and energy are less expensive. The question is, how do we get it from point A to point B? I argue that pipelines are the safest way of transporting oil and gas because the container is buried within below the surface. It doesn't move. It can't hit other people. It can't hit other trucks. Yes, leaks do occasionally happen, but we have cleanups for these leaks, and historically about 50% of the spilled oil is recovered. And what is more important, lives of human beings or environmental damage that can be cleaned up.
Tyson, you buy that? The pipeline is safer than surface transportation?
I think generally pipelines can be safer, but the fact is that there is no 100% safe oil and gas infrastructure, whether you're talking about rail or pipelines. And it's very important to note that a lot of these folks in Nebraska and elsewhere, they're not necessarily your traditional environmentalists. These are property owners, these are farmers, they're ranchers, they're concerned citizens. The face of the environmental movement has less to do with the stereotypical tree hugger and more to do with people who want to have input onto what types of developments occur in their neighborhoods and their states. And I disagree with this emphasis that we need to exploit all of our oil and gas resources because somehow it's a gift to us. The fact is that the U.S. dependence on oil, as George Bush said in his State of the Union address several years ago, that we're addicted to oil, and that addiction has painful consequences because the price of oil is not set by U.S. oil producers. It is set by global events. And as long as the United States and other countries like China are tethered to events outside their control, in order for the United States to remain competitive going forward, the less we can rely on oil as a fuel, and the more we can generate our own cleaner sources independent of commodity pricing, things like renewable energy, focusing on mass transit. These are the types of investments that are going to make the United States more competitive in the future. Tying us to more and more oil development is a recipe for disaster. And when you look at the economics of renewables, Deutsche Bank just came out with a report saying by 2016, rooftop solar is going to be cost competitive with the electric grid in 47 U.S. states. The fact of the matter is that we are in the computer age when fossil fuels represent the typewriter. And the quicker that the United States positions to transitioning to renewables, the more competitive we're going to be, because that's what other countries are doing, and we're falling behind on the patent race, on the manufacturing race, and this obsession with increasing more and more reliance on oil is not going to get the job done.
Right, Dan, isn't that a good point?
There's just so much wrong with that it's just hard to know where to start. Well, of course there's no 100% safe transportation. Nothing is 100% safe. If you wanted to be 100% safe, you would stay in your house all day and you wouldn't go out. You wouldn't even ride one of those Metro North trains in New York that just got in an accident where there were 6 or 7 people killed. So yes, getting any kind of energy has a certain amount of risk, but it doesn't mean we need to go back to caves and not have any at all. Secondly,
I don't think I was advocating going back into caves.
All right, but you were saying nothing's 100% safe. You're right, nothing is 100% safe.
With
but
fossil
we need
fuels.
To take something, nothing's 100% safe with anything.
I have never known of any sort of industrial mishap involving rooftop solar panels. The fact of the matter is that there are very significant degrees of safety risk, of environmental risk, and climate risk between fossil fuel extraction and transportation and renewable energy development.
Well, the point is, as you point out, we are in the computer age. Computers, cell phones, Kindles, they take masses of energy. We would have to cover the whole of the United States with solar panels. Solar and wind and biofuels represent 5% of our electricity production.
Right, but would you support the idea of lessening dependence on fossil fuels and moving towards more renewable sources of energy?
We need to do what the market tells us. If fossil fuels are less expensive, and right now natural gas and oil are at very low prices, we should be taking advantage of those and using them. You are saying that American citizens should pay more for their electricity bills and use solar and wind. And you're not putting these two alternatives together. You're making it seem as though it is the same cost to run these different types of fuels. When wind and solar cost more, they are less efficient, and people are going to have to pay more, either in taxes because the government is subsidizing it, or in utility bills. And people have other things to do with their money. Do you know that the lowest fifth of the income group spends 25% of its income on electricity, energy, and gasoline? The top 20% pays 4%. I mean, it's fine for this top 20% to say you should be using solar and wind, but it has a very dramatic effect on poor people who are starting out. And besides, it's completely impossible for us to replace fossil fuels with wind and solar. Right now, renewables only produce 5% of America's electricity. Coal produces about 40%. We haven't even talked about the advantages of natural gas versus coal, which now produces 40% of our electricity. Why don't we want to say, for example, whittle down coal and use more natural gas, for example? I mean, these are possibilities. The focus on wind and solar is completely impractical. It's a pipe dream. It's a fantasy.
All right, Tyson, does price actually come into this in a big way, that it's going to cost a lot more to go to renewable sources of energy?
No, absolutely not. First of all, while oil prices are low right now,
You're joking, Tyson.
The Edison Electric Institute, which is the lobbying trade association for the corporate electric utility industry, came out with a white paper in February 2013 identifying the #1 threat to the centralized utility model. That #1 threat was rooftop solar. Because everybody, Wall Street, the utility industry, understands that solar and other distributed small sources of renewable energy are what's known as disruptive technologies. They are radically changing the fundamental economics of an electricity delivery system that we've had in place for over a century. That is what the economics are telling us. And the issue here is entrenched monopolistic industries are fighting back against that. And Keystone is an example, but also this claim that renewables are too expensive is not accurate.
Okay, Dan, I want to get back to the pipeline itself. There's also a big debate going on about the number of jobs that construction of this pipeline is going to create. We've heard figures of 45,000 jobs. We've heard Charles Schumacher, the Democrat senator from New York, tell us, well, actually, it's not going to be 42,000, actually, not 42,000 jobs. It may create that number of jobs during the construction period, which will last just over 19 weeks. But in reality, the number of permanent jobs it will create is a few dozen, about 35.
Well, the pipeline is going to create some jobs in the construction, but most of the jobs are going to be in our refineries along the Gulf Coast. Right now, we are importing oil from Venezuela, some oil from Asia. That source of crude, heavy crude oil, is going down. We have some of the most efficient refineries in the world. We need that heavy crude from Canada to process in our refineries, and we mix it with the volatile oil that comes from the Bakken. And we produce a lot of products from that, some of which we can export, some of which we can use here. So the jobs are mostly in the refineries, the permanent jobs.
Do you buy that jobs argument?
No, because the Gulf Coast refining capacity is already over 93%. 75% of the 3.5 million barrels of gasoline, diesel, and other refined products that we export every day are coming out of the Gulf Coast. The Gulf Coast is extraordinarily well supplied with ample crude inventories to turn that stuff into gasoline and diesel. The important thing to understand here is that the United States is experiencing flattening oil consumption. And where the growth market is for oil companies is selling in to places like Asia and elsewhere where oil consumption is still growing at 4 to 6% a year. That's what this Keystone pipeline is all about. It has nothing to do with adequately supplying U.S. refining capacity. It has everything to do with vastly improving the profit margins of the oil industry by moving that product into foreign markets where it can fetch a higher price. And that's the problem I have with the Keystone debate, is that its proponents have not been honest with the American people about what this project's intentions are really all about. They should just come out and say, this is about getting landlocked Canadian crude into the international market where those producers can fetch a higher price than they currently can.
Okay, Don, I've got 40 seconds.
Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with anyone making profits. There are many shareholders in the United States who have investments in oil companies. If they make more profits, that's very good for them. Also, having the Keystone oil come to the United States to be refined gives us jobs, gives us product, and it's a win-win for everybody.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for joining us. That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at cctv-america. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.